Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with Care Patrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We educate our clients about options for healthcare in their area, be those Medicare certified or insurance paid or private pay. We're actually paid in private pay situations where our clients qualify for and want to go or end up going, perhaps is a better way to say it, to senior living communities or using sitter services that we recommend. But we educate about all sorts of topics, and included in that is our great interest and joy in presenting to you every other Monday a contact hour that is credentialed by the Alabama Board of Social Work, is also credentialed by the Alabama Board of Nursing. Each of these entities say that this is a 1.0 contact hour for nurses and social workers. In order to receive credit, you must complete our online evaluation. It is password protected. We give the password at the end today, and in that way, the Alabama Board of Social Work says to us that they will consider this hour live, or like a classroom hour. So that's why we do our evaluation the way that we do. It's online, and I'll read for you now that many of us are in and joined. I'll read for you, for those of you who are participating by phone or working at your desk, eating lunch, and so forth. I'll read for you the link, and I'll also read it for our YouTube watchers. So those who go to YouTube under Sean Barnes Care Patrol, we have about 110 or so recorded CEUs that you can take for credit. And if you're watching there, the link for this CEU is https://surveymonkey.com/all uppercase letters, B as in boy, 9, V as in victory, L, W, 6, 8. That's our evaluation link. It is password protected. We'll give it at the end of today's presentation. And we're so happy to be joined today again by returning presenter who was well recommended, Billy Curtis, who is the program manager at the Alzheimer's Association. And I know that he will, like I do, appreciate any questions that you may have or observations or outcomes that you've experienced, because each of us on this call, I believe, is enriched when we hear from you. So please do engage in discussion. You can do so using the chat room, or you can raise your hand or instant message me and ask for me to unmute you, and I'll be happy to do so, so you can share your experience with us. So without further pause, if there are no questions in the chat room, which I don't see any, I'll give the floor to Mr. Curtis. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I'm excited about learning what we have to learn today.
Well, thank you, Sean. We appreciate this opportunity. As you said, my name is Billy Curtis. I'm the program manager for the Alabama chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So all of our functions that have to do with care and support, whether it's community education, starting and facilitating support groups, things like that, kind of falls underneath my area. And one of our big emphasis that we have is community education, is getting information out to caregivers, both family caregivers and professional caregivers, on issues and things related to dementia care. And so we appreciate this opportunity to share some of our information that hopefully you will find useful. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Oh, I got to get the right one up. Click the right button. Let me see. Oops, click the wrong button. Let's try that again. And there we go.
There we go.
So is that showing up, Sean? Everybody can
It
see
is
that?
showing up. I think yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Our program today is responding to dementia-related behaviors. We're going to hit a lot of information and try to tailor it toward the direction of this group. And as Sean said, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat and we will try to address them as we go through. This is a program that's actually part of a series that we have called the Empowered Caregiver. And we've just reworked this in the last 9 months or so, took some of our existing programs, created a couple of new programs, and put together this series. We actually have now done with this group 2 of these, the Communicating Effectively and Responding to Dementia-Related Behaviors today. But these exist, and if you have access to a group, whether it be family caregivers or professional caregivers, this is some of the things that we have that we can offer in the community. Today, we're going to go through some things describing how dementia can cause changes in a person's behavior, listing possible triggers for those dementia-related behaviors, comparing non-medical versus medical ways to address the behaviors. Some just simple interventions that we can take in our day-to-day activities, and talk about our 4-step approach to managing behaviors. This is just kind of a rubric, kind of just of a way to think of in 4 easy steps when we encounter behavior of any type, really, that we can apply this rubric and learn how to manage that behavior. I'll talk a little bit about the behavior changes that we see. Remembering with dementia-related behavior, it's an alarm. It's something telling us that there is a need that is not being met. When we are caring for someone and they feel agitated, unsafe, uncomfortable, anxious, that's the alarm bell going off. They're telling us there is a need that's not being met. And because they have a brain disease that is Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, they often are not able to articulate what that need is. Behavior is not always the same. As you know, as a caregiver, a person may have very, very good days. They may have bad days sprinkled in between. Also want to remember that the person with dementia, they're not always in control of their behavior. They're not choosing to be difficult. They're not choosing to be anxious. They have a disease, they have Alzheimer's, and it affects the processes of the brain. One thing that I think is helpful to remember when we're working with someone with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, we have to remember that to them, everything they're doing makes perfect sense. Their behavior that they're exhibiting to them in the altered state of their brain because of the disease seems like the logical course of action. And so they're not always in control of what's going on.
We have a question. I'm sorry
Sure.
to interrupt.
No
Anna
problem.
Wilson asked, hello, I have a general question. Do you have strategies for how children of dementia patients can lovingly take on the parent role with strongly independent, in quotes, parents, if that makes sense?
So that is an awesome question, and that is a very common issue as folks sort of move, as the dynamics change, as you become parents to your parents. And that naturally happens to all of us. But when you have a parent who has dementia, it becomes very different. I think some of what we're going to talk about today has some applications and might be very helpful in sort of navigating that change in relationship. As we're talking about what's causing these changes in the behavior, we know that brain cells are breaking down. This is a brain disease. Alzheimer's is not normal aging. As I like to tell people, your brain is not supposed to die before you do. But when you have Alzheimer's or dementia, your brain is beginning to break down. These changes, they really make it harder for the person to understand, to process, to know what's going on in the world around them. And so their assessment of what's safe, what's real, what is actually going on is altered. A few things to remember just about Alzheimer's in general. You'll hear when we talk about dementia, you often hear the term mild cognitive impairment. And that's kind of the term that's often thrown out when someone has identified, maybe your physician has identified that someone has some obvious cognitive changes that are probably dementia, and they'll say, well, they have mild cognitive impairment, MCI. You'll hear that a lot. And then when we talk about actually moving into the dementia diagnosis, we divide it up into early, middle, and late. In the early stages, often the person is very able to live what we would almost call a normal life, semi-independent life. This is when the person is able to still live at home, maybe with a family caretaker, a part-time caretaker, a spouse or a child. And often in that MCI stage and early Alzheimer's stage, not everyone will realize that something is really happening with that person cognitively, but they can do fairly well. So we move into the middle stages. That's when we really start to see a lot of behavioral changes. It becomes difficult for the person to be cared for, maybe in a home environment. A lot of times families in this stage will begin to look at assisted care, at memory care facilities. That's when we start seeing typically more of the anxiety based behavior, but not always. It can come at any point in the dementia diagnosis, see more wandering and things like this. And then we move into the late stages where the person is really not able to communicate or effectively sort of live independently. And for me, I like to know the story. I'm kind of a visual learner. I think it's important to remember what's happening as a person goes in through these stages of dementia. The basic mechanism of what's going on is as the brain cells start to die off, the first section that is affected is the hippocampus, and that's the part of the brain that processes memory. So of course, that's the first thing to go. It's like your brain sees input but can't change it into memory. It's like your brain has lost its save button almost, and that is the basic mechanism of what's going on when Alzheimer's begins in the brain. In the hippocampus, they can no longer form those short-term, especially memories. As the disease progresses, then we get into the parietal cortex, and the dementia patient begins to have a little trouble with spatial orientation. And that's why you may notice, especially as you go into the middle stages of dementia, a dementia patient can be really, really upset by things going on in the periphery. They begin to lose balance, steps become a problem, things like that, because the spatial orientation of what's going on in the world around them is affected. And then we move on into the temporal and frontal lobes, begins to affect language, and personality is usually sort of the next thing affected. And when we see these dramatic changes, especially in the middle stages in someone's personality, as the dementia diagnosis progresses, we see our sweet little grandmother becomes cussing like a sailor and things like that. So we really see those dramatic changes personality-wise as we move into that stage. So remember, this is a brain disease. There are actual changes taking place in the brain that are causing the person with the diagnosis, the person with the disease, to act like what we're seeing. I'm going to hopefully share a couple of very short videos. Sean, if the sound comes through, give me a thumbs up.
The changes in the brain that occur with Alzheimer's and other dementias then can impact on somebody's cognition, their functioning, and also their behavior. Now, these changes aren't consistent over time, but they can vary. They can vary day by day, and then they can also vary as the disease progresses.
Individuals living with dementia can have trouble understanding the world around them. And unfortunately, that could lead to them not knowing what's real, what's safe, or what's appropriate. That uncertainty then sometimes leads to dementia-related behaviors.
As I said there, it doesn't happen. It's not just on a straight trend line. Everyone's diagnosis plays out differently when they have dementia. I think the numbers tell us that someone typically lives from 5 to 7 years with a dementia diagnosis after they're diagnosed. Some people live as long as 10, 12, 15, even 20 years with dementia. Also, people go through at different it progresses at different rates. Some folks will stall in the MCI, the mild cognitive impairment stage, and never really go into full-blown dementia. Others will progress rapidly through 1 or 2 stages and then stall there. So everyone's diagnosis is just a little bit different, and that's going to be reflected in their behavior is going to be just a little bit different from patient to patient. Key to this, behaviors are a form of communication. The person with dementia, the behavior they're exhibiting is trying to tell us something. They're reacting to what they think, feel, what they need from around them, with the world around them. But what they're doing is they're trying to communicate with us. And so the key for us as caregivers is to think of it as communication. All right, when the person is showing anxiety, when the person is showing aggression or anger, when the person is wandering, all of these things are telling us something. The difficulty comes as a caregiver in figuring out what they're trying to tell us and how to interpret that as communication in the care that we're going to deliver. And we talk about some of the most common behaviors we see. We do have anxiety and agitation, feelings of restlessness, discomfort, those sort of agitation behaviors, aggression and anger. Person may have verbal or even physical outburst, and that does happen with folks who are going through their dementia diagnosis. Suspicions and delusions. They may believe things that just aren't exactly true. This is what I remember in my family's personal stories. My father's mother went through dementia. What I remember as a child, seeing her have dementia in her life, is she was always claiming everybody was stealing her stuff all the time. I heard, well, somebody stole my purse, somebody stole my keys. That sort of suspicion, delusion, things like that. Very common as folks go through their dementia diagnosis. And then getting lost or wandering. Very common. The numbers I see tell us that at least 60% of people with a dementia diagnosis will wander at some point in their diagnosis. Some of the difficulty with that is it's hard to tell when they're going to wander. It can happen in the early stages. It's more common in the middle stages. But the person who you're caring for, whether it be as a family caregiver or a professional caregiver, the difficulty is you can't really predict it. The person may be just fine today to walk around the neighborhood where they've lived for 30 years, and tomorrow can't find their way back from the mailbox. So that is very difficult, and that's very common.
My mother did experience some degree of suspicion, and this is a rather long and involved story, but my name is Freddie James. My father's name was Fred James, and shortly after he died, my mother accused me actually of stealing some money, of going to the bank and actually using my father's name and my name, the similarity, to take some money, which absolutely had not happened, but this suspicion had developed in her mind. It took a lot of patience. It took a lot of explaining, but eventually it just took letting the situation die down, not getting too involved in it myself. In other words, not reacting in anger, not reacting with a lot of emotion, but just allowing her to work through the process.
A little bit wandering also. So we got wandering. Just a knowledge check here. It only happens in the early stage, and just kind of gave that one away as false. It can happen at any stage. Probably a little more common actually in the middle stage. We'll throw this in here. Probably most folks on this call already know about it, but if not, I want to make sure everyone knows about Project Lifesaver. That's the state program that provides free radio identification bracelets for folks with dementia. In Alabama, they are administered by the sheriff's departments. So anyone who is caregiving for someone who has a dementia diagnosis, they can contact their local sheriff's department. They get this free radio identification bracelet, and this program claims a 100% success rate, that they've never lost anyone who has their bracelet on. But it's called Project Lifesaver. It's free, and in Alabama, it's administered through all the local sheriff's departments. Talk about some triggers for the dementia-related behavior. All right, some of the triggers that we run into, of course, we have the physical. This can be result pain, discomfort, other unmet needs. One thing that we need to remember with folks with dementia is as they go, especially in that early and then into the middle stages, they have greater difficulty in articulating what is happening with them. They can't articulate that my feet hurt because my shoes don't fit well. And so they'll exhibit behavior. They may wander because their feet hurt and all they know to do is to keep walking. So the physical trigger is sometimes harder to spot, but that can often be a trigger for what's going on in the behavior. There's something going on physically, and the behavior is trying to communicate to us that there's a problem. Of course, there's the social, being around people. We know that sometimes folks with dementia can be very upset by being in a room with a lot of distraction, a lot of other people around, a lot of noise, a lot of sources of stimulation, can very easily be overstimulated. So that can be what's going on. We know so environmental, kind of tied into social. Some folks with dementia like a bright room. Some are distracted by a bright room. Some folks with dementia like some background noise, like some music. Others can be very upset by too much going on in the background. We already know that the parts of the brain that deal with peripheral vision, sort of what's happening around us, balance, those sort of things are being affected with dementia. And so that can be something going on. So their behavior may be in response to something social or environmental that's causing them anxiety. And so they're acting out in the behavior. And we just have to find a way to figure out what they're trying to communicate. And then also personal feelings that they're experiencing. It's interesting that folks with dementia, they still have that sense of self, that sense of personhood. And so they can be just upset because they know their world has changed. They may not know what's happening, but they're still aware that there is a change. And so they may be having internal stress, anxiety, and things like that. So what we're going to work on and really focus on today are non-medical approaches. We know that there are, and we'll talk about this later on, great strides in medical approaches, and sometimes that's very important and appropriate. But there are some non-medical approaches, sort of this rubric we're going to talk about for behaviors that kind of help us move through and move past the what's being communicated with us. We believe that a non-medical approach should always be the first step. Figure out what's going on. Focus on giving that physical and emotional comfort. And because something's going on that's sending us a message, it's communicating to us through the behavior, we got to decipher it and give a physical and emotional comfort. This approach really helps us identify and meet the needs of the person, helps us get into their reality and to help them where they are. And the great thing here with this sort of rubric and approach is we're using that wealth of knowledge that we have about the person we're giving care to. Even as a professional caregiver, we build relationships with folks as we care for them over time. And we need to think of that as, hey, we're not just, as we're getting to know them, we're actually building up this library of knowledge of what they like, what they don't like, good times a day, bad times a day, how meals affect them, how medication affects them. We're building up this library of knowledge, and that's going to help us in giving care to them. That's going to help us figuring out what they're trying to communicate to us through their behavior. All right, so let's talk about our four-step approach here. So the idea is that we can address just about any behavior by following these four steps. That if we take this as our guide, we take this as our rubric for care, and we just follow these four steps every time, that we can, the vast majority of the time, get to sort of the root of what is being communicated to us through the behavior and be able to meet that need. First of all, we got to detect and connect what's going on. Secondly, take four, find out any physical need. Third, we want to help with whatever emotional needs are present. And then fourth, review and plan for next time. As caregivers for folks with dementia, we know there's going to be a next time. Behavior tends to be repeated over and over and over as they go through their path with dementia, with a dementia diagnosis. And so every time we go through this step, we need to have that part at the end where we go, okay, how well did that work? did that work well? So I want to remember that so I can use it again in the future. Or did I just bomb big time and I want to make sure I don't use that in the future and look for a different strategy? All right. So first, talking about detecting and connecting. It's using what we know about the person. As we build relationships, as we go through extended periods of giving care to the same patients, we begin to know them. We understand their needs, their feelings, their motivations, what seems to make them happy, what seems to irritate them. We know this, so we use that information, that library that we've connected on who they are, to understand their needs and feelings. And we want to make sure we join them in their reality. And we talk about that a lot in the Alzheimer's Association, joining people in their reality. That we need to remember, we're not going to, unfortunately, bring someone who's suffering from dementia with logic back into our world. It's just not going to happen. We have to be willing to step into their reality to try to see the world from their perspective. And remember, once again, as I said earlier, remember, everything they're doing makes perfect sense to them. Everything they're doing seems like the logical path to take for them. So we want to, as much as possible, step into their reality and see if we can work through that. Calm, quiet, respect as you figure out the situation, avoid correcting the person. I want to speak for a second on that, approaching the person calmly and quietly. We found that folks with a dementia diagnosis, even as they go through the stages, even as they lose even their ability to speak, are still very aware of things like body language. And they will pick up on the body language of the person that they're interacting with. If we approach someone with a dementia diagnosis and our brow is kind of furrowed and our arms are crossed and it looks like we're frustrated or maybe a little upset, they're going to pick up on that. And that's going to be usually reflected in their response to us. But if our body language is reflecting, hey, openness, our hands are out, we're calm, we look like we're kind, we're approaching them on their level. Maybe if they're sitting, that we get down very close, we're staying in front of them, so we're not in that confusing peripheral vision area that some struggle with. The body language that we convey can be very, very helpful in how we interact with someone with a dementia diagnosis. One of the researchers from UAB, who's done a number of programs for us, says this over and over, and I've picked up from her presentations. She does research on care-resistant behaviors. And the one thing that she has found in her research that is the biggest trigger for care-resistant behavior, and that can be defined as everything from just not doing what you want them to do to actually reacting violently and striking the caregiver. But the number one trigger for care-resistant behavior, thought this is interesting, is being talked to like a child. Think about that. The person with dementia being talked to like a child. They still retain a sense of autonomy, a sense of self, a sense of personhood. And so just remembering to speak with respect as you would to another adult goes a long way in enabling us to communicate and to have effective interaction with a dementia patient. So with detecting and connecting, we're going to ask these questions when we encounter someone. Okay, something's happening, who was there when the behavior took place? Is there a person or people there that maybe contributed? Is there a person they were unfamiliar with? Is there maybe a person that they've had conflict with? Is there a family member there? Who was there when the behavior and it was initiated? What took place just before or just after the behavior? Was there something happening? Were they in the TV room of the care facility and there was a lot of activity going on that was very disconcerting? Is there something like that going on? When does it usually happen? Does the person, of course, we're all familiar with sundowning. That's a big trigger. We know in the evening, a lot of folks with dementia really struggle with the transition from daytime to nighttime. But there can be other triggers that say, well, this person, do they seem to get agitated a lot? About 11:30. Well, is their blood sugar crashing? Is there something we need to pay attention to there? So when does it take place? Where did it take place? That can be another big trigger. Does this person, do better if they've had a lot of exposure to sunlight and maybe get out and walk. And so if they're just inside all the time, is that kind of a trigger? And then, of course, how did I react? Am I, through my reaction to their behavior, contributing to the situation getting worse? Is my body language, is how I speak to them, are these things helping to move the needle in the right direction? Remembering, as we said earlier, folks with dementia, even very far into their diagnosis, when they're even gone to the point that they're nonverbal, still very much pick up on our body language. And then secondly, after the direct and connect, we're going to take care of the physical needs. We're going to look at any needs that are connected to a medical issue, physical pain. Remember, as someone is suffering from a dementia diagnosis, they're having greater difficulty all the time in articulating what's going on. So there could be a physical discomfort. Their shoes don't fit. They have had an accident, but they can't articulate what has happened. They're just suffering, some sort of physical discomfort. And so that is triggering some sort of strange behavior. And so if we try to be attuned, first of all, to the physical need, often that can solve the problem. Okay. We find that Miss Jones, who we're caring for, is pacing and pacing and pacing and pacing. Well, it's because her shoes no longer fit well, and she just doesn't know what else to do. So we address the physical need. It could be something like we know folks with the dementia diagnosis, especially women, tend to have problems with things like urinary tract infections because they don't remember to drink enough. And so, but they can't articulate to us that that's the pain they're having. Well, if we can do a little detective work, we can figure out that's what's causing the problem, then also gives us a path going forward to make sure they stay hydrated and that this doesn't continue. So look for and address, is there a physical need going on? Is something physical happening that's driving the behavior? We want to look at the emotional needs. Think about how they're feeling. Remember, it may not make any sense, but it's their reality. And we need to get into their reality and look at the situation from their eyes. Focus on the emotions instead of the facts. It's very frustrating at times, but we're not going to bring someone in their dementia diagnosis back to reality with facts. We need to just be in their reality, focus on the emotion that they're feeling. Just offer comfort. Let them know that you're there. Sometimes the greatest thing we can do is just being a soft, reassuring, calming presence who brings calming words, calming body language, and that helps sort of diffuse the situation. Redirect their energy. Redirecting is always a great strategy. If someone is just, being the stimulation of being in the TV room with all of the other residents of an assisted care living facility seems like it's just causing agitation. Let's find something that maybe gives them a little calm time. Find something that moves into something that they enjoy, a place, an activity that is more suited to their personality. They don't respond to what you're trying, that's kind of taking note of it and trying something else. But help with the emotional need, physical need, then emotional need. Then review and plan for next time. We know that there's probably going to be a next time. We know if the person we're working with has issues with sundowning today, transitioning from daytime to nighttime, it's probably going to happen tomorrow, and it's probably going to happen the next day. So let's think, okay, what helped well with that today? What didn't work? What can I learn from this so that I can be a better caregiver for them going forward? Are there others I need to bring in to help with the situation? Is there an activity that will help diffuse the situation? And if there is, how can I remember that, take note of it, and use it next time? All right, we're going to look at a couple of real life examples of how we take this 4-step approach, this little rubric, and make it work. All right, so we want to look at a couple of examples and how we might just walk through that. So let's say we're looking at a person that we're the caregiver for, and they're showing a lot of anxiety or agitation. We just want to step back and let's look at the rubric real quick. What's going on? Mrs. Smith is showing a lot of anxiety today. She seems very upset. She just wants to, seems very irritated. She seems like she just can't calm down. All right, well, let's detect and connect. Let's get in there. What's going on? Is this new behavior? Is this different from the past? Is this something else, something that we need to try and interpret? What is she trying to communicate with us? Then look in there. Is there a physical need? Is there a physical need of what's going on? Is there something happening with clothes she's wearing, the shoes she's wearing, her medication schedule, her eating schedule? Is there something physical that's going on that needs attention that might help us be able to give her care? And then look, is there an emotional need? Has something happened that has upset her normal schedule? Has she had been overstimulated, and so that's causing a lot of anxiety and agitation? Is she understimulated? Some folks who are in a dementia diagnosis like a quiet room, some like a noisier room, some like the TV, some like sitting by a window. So is there something to help with that emotional need? And then when we finally work our way through those steps, then we want to say, okay, what worked well? What helped resolve this? What helped speak to that need in her life? And then make note of it, and also make note of what didn't work, because there's probably going to be a next time. Aggression and anger. We know that this is a difficult one. We know that sometimes folks in a dementia diagnosis will exhibit aggression, even physical aggression, and exhibit a lot of anger. The good news is this has been communicated to me, is this typically is sort of a phase, because as people go through a dementia diagnosis, their behavior does change. They might go through a phase of aggression and anger, but typically it's not going to be their entire remainder of their life. But this especially, connect with them, what's going on. This can be driven very much by a physical need. They're suffering pain. They're suffering some sort of pain in their life, physical pain, and they don't know how to articulate it. And this can very often lead to aggressive and angry behavior. So if you're a caregiver, the challenge is not to take that anger that's being exhibited personally. Remember, we want to exist in their reality and say, okay, is there what is happening physically that's causing them actual pain that is coming out and communicated to us through this behavior? And if we can identify the physical need, very often that's the trigger behind aggression and anger, is a physical pain or something that they just can't articulate. Then after that, see if there's an emotional need triggering it. Is there something going on with, someone that they don't get along with? Someone has triggered something. Is there an emotional need? And then make note. Okay, Mrs. Smith, when she, doesn't get enough sleep, she becomes very frustrated and angry. Things like that. Figure out what's going on with that need and how we can use it in the future.
Lisa Hurd has a comment.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
She says, personal note here, found out that my almost 94-year-old mom had a sodium deficiency, which ultimately
absolutely
linked her to confusion delusion. I thought she was having a stroke at first. Have addressed the sodium intake, which has helped immensely. To address her sundown syndrome, a mild antidepressant was prescribed.
Yes, a lot of folks are having success with it. Is it Bolsamra? I think doctors have used. It helps with the sleep schedules that get flipped, and I know Rexulti has been prescribed for some behavioral things. So yes, there are. That's the great thing. There are medical things that we can do, and that's brings up that great point. The behavior that we're seeing is trying to tell us something, and we've got to figure out. And medical is often, or can very much be, what's driving it. That there's a medical condition, meds are not regulated, something needs to be checked by a doctor, and that's why we go through this process. So yes, excellent point. Suspicions and delusions. Like I said, I remember this very much as a child with my grandmother, and as she went through her dementia journey. Detect and connect what's going on. Is there a physical need driving it? Is there an emotional need? These things can often be, an emotional need, uncertainty, feeling just out of power, out of control. Redirection seems to be a real good strategy for this type behavior. help the person get involved in an activity that's calming, resting, redirecting, sort of getting them away from it. Because, this is with dementia, if we can redirect in just a couple of minutes, that situation will be gone because, they're not able to remember what was causing them such consternation and difficulty. So redirection can be a very helpful strategy. And then, okay, that behavior is probably going to come back up again. How am I going to, what worked, what didn't work? And getting lost or wandering, another one that can be driven by a physical pain, a physical need, a medication issue. Something as simple as, hey, this is a person who wants to wander late morning or late afternoon. It's because their blood sugar crashes and they're getting ready for a mealtime, but they can't express that I feel bad. They'll just start walking. So we want to see, is there a physical need that needs to be taken care of? Is there an emotional need that needs to be taken care of? Something we can do to help them out emotionally, being reassuring, and then once again, just review and plan. So the same steps we can take and apply to any of these situations and walk through them and hopefully arrive at a resolution that is good for the person that we're giving care to. Back on the question we just had a minute ago, medical approaches, we need to be aware of these things. Drug side effects. Folks that we're giving care to who have dementia, just because of their age, or often have a lot of things going on medication-wise. And so we need to make sure, okay, are there interactions that the doctors haven't taken into account that are causing problems, that are causing some behavior? Is the behavior telling us that their medications are not well balanced, I guess is the easiest way to sell it. Discomfort from infections and other conditions. And this is big. That we mentioned the urinary tract infection, which can be a big one. Just being sick. It's hard for a person who has dementia. They may have fallen yesterday and banged their elbow, but they can't articulate, hey, my arm is hurting, but they'll have behavior that tells us something is wrong. And then uncorrected hearing or vision problems. This is a big one that I think is often overlooked. Making sure the person, did they remember to get their glasses? If they didn't remember to put on their glasses, then everything is going to seem out of whack and it's going to be reflected in their behavior. Did they remember to put in their hearing aids? Did we remember to check the batteries in their hearing aids? Because if they don't have their hearing aids and they're used to them, then their world has been altered around them and they may reflect their confusion and frustration in behavior. Interesting on hearing loss, there is actually evidence out there that for someone who has dementia, if we don't pay attention to their hearing loss, their dementia will progress faster. So we definitely need to make sure that we're paying attention to those hearing issues for our dementia patients. Medications, of course, always talk to the doctor, see if there's a need to adjust, take into account medications. Some of these antipsychotic medications, and we're finding some of the things that were originally developed for depression and anxiety really can be helpful sometimes to folks with dementia. Always talk to your doctor, always bring them in the loop. And then, of course, there is the option, which, sometimes we have to take care of. We have a couple of really good geriatric psychiatry units in the Birmingham area. And I know that sounds awful. Gosh, I recommend to the person who I'm giving care for that they go to those. From what I've been told in talking with the folks who have interacted with those units, those actually can be very well. Often a person goes to them with a behavior issue, and it's just a very short stay as they find a medical intervention, a drug intervention that helps with the behavior, and then they're able to return to their home or to their nursing facility and able to function fine. So sometimes that can be even an option that will work. Moving forward, when additional help is needed beyond that, as a caregiver, professional caregiver, or family caregiver, behaviors can be very stressful. They can become more severe as the disease progresses. As a caregiver, professional or family caregiver, want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. want to make sure that we're bringing the best version of us to give care at any time. We want to make sure that we're taking care of our emotional health and our physical health, and make sure we're the best we can be, I guess, as the Army would say. Also, talking about a little bit about safety. As a professional caregiver coming in from the outside, we may sometimes find ourselves in that role of needing to point out things for safety issues, whether it's physical safety of the house, safety of others in the environment, safety of the person we're giving care to. We always put this in there, even though it applies mostly to home caregivers. This is something we really like to bring to people's attention. But if you're giving care in a patient's home, things like firearms in the home can be very, very dangerous, because the family will think, okay, well, I don't want to upset Dad. He always, if I took the guns away, Dad would be upset. And we're in the South, so there's probably gonna be guns in the house. So I'm gonna take away all the ammunition, and he won't know, and we'll be fine. The problem then is, what if Dad decides to go wandering and he takes his shotgun with him? The law enforcement that he encounters, they don't know that you've hidden all the ammunition and that he's not a danger. Or if someone knocks on the door and he answers the door with a gun, they don't know that he has no access to ammunition. So we just like to point out an extra step of safety when it comes to firearms in the home when you have a patient with dementia is definitely worth considering. Oh, and as far as 911, I encourage people, if you're caregiving for someone in a home, it's okay to contact 911 on the non-emergency line. Most of these systems have pretty complete computer systems. And if you've been to a 911 center, when you're calling them, they're pulling up on multiple computer screens everything about you, your neighborhood, your house, previous calls, things like that. It's okay. You might want to call and say, hey, I work for the Smiths. They live on Cloverfield Lane, 221 Cloverfield Lane. The dad has dementia. He's prone to wandering. You know what? 911, they'll make a note of that, and that will help them in their response. And so if a call comes in, they'll know, okay, Smith, Cloverfield Lane, prone to wandering. They have some access to that. So that can actually be beneficial also. And then we'll jump into some questions, but I always like to point out resources we have, especially our helpline number. Toll free, 800-272-3900. This number you can call 24 hours a day. Everyone who answers the phone has at least a master's level of education related to dementia. No question too bizarre. And it's not just family caregivers. Professional caregivers can call, and you can say, hey, I'm working with the so-and-so family. I go into their home 4 times a week, and I keep seeing XYZ behavior. And they may be able to say, hey, that sounds like behavior you ought to talk to a physician about, or that sounds like something that might benefit from XYZ strategies. So it's a resource that's available for professional caregivers also, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. We've got great online resources. If you go alz.org, just surf around our website, all kinds of stuff on there, some educational programs. There are some professional education programs on there that you can do virtually and things like that.
I have a question. Do you all
Yes, sir.
administer?
Oh, I lost you.
I said, do you all administer driving tests?
We do not. We do
Okay.
not. And that is a big issue, driving, when to take away mom or dad's keys. We actually have a whole class on dementia conversations about those difficult conversations. My experience for that, a good strategy is to involve a third party, especially if it's dad, granddad who's still driving past when they should and they've had a little wreck or something, or you're concerned about it. You can get a third party who they respect, might be more effective in convincing them, hey, this is the time to put down your keys. This is the time to not be driving. And then you pair that with a plan. So you go to them and say, hey, Dad, we know, it's time for you to lose your keys, but your friend Bob from down the street, he's still going to drive you to church every Sunday, and then the church van will come around on Wednesday and take you to dinner, and Joe down the street says he can still take you out to the hardware store a couple of times a week if you want to go. So having someone who's an authority to speak to that, to kind of take the burden off the family, paired with a plan that makes it sound like you're not taking away all of the autonomy and independence, sometimes can be a good workable strategy.
That's a great idea to have a plan for what happens next when the keys are gone. I
Mhm.
often tell folks to go to their doctor and have them
Yes,
suggest that driving is no longer
yeah,
safe.
that's a great
Typically,
strategy.
when you do that, when you're working with a doctor in that way, it's best to fax or call ahead to the doctor's office to let them know that's why you're there. And Marie Carter says UAB outpatient OT department does driving
To know.
evals. I knew it was done at UAB, Ms. Carter. I didn't know where. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and yeah, the working with your doctor, that's you're right. That's another great strategy. And in my experience, most physicians are willing to do that. They understand that sometimes they can help the family by being the heavy and being the person to help with that burden. So yeah, that's another great strategy. But yeah, driving, it cuts into such issues of autonomy and independence and selfhood and all of that. It can be a tough one.
And early in our presentation, someone had a comment, Miss Wilson, Anna Wilson, about how do you lovingly take on the parent role. And I wanted to go back to that, Miss Wilson. In working with families as I typically instruct people that you are not their parent, you are their child. And while you may assume the role of their safety and looking out for it, it's best and you'll be most productive if you continue to approach them as their child and ask their help in curing some behavior or issue versus going to them from a parental or a position of authority and telling them that they can no longer do this nor no longer do that. Those kind of conversations typically do not end well because, as you had pointed out earlier, Mr. Curtis, that folks with dementia still have a sense of self and a sense of decorum and a sense of what's proper. I mean, those sorts of things are embedded in us. So for us to assume the role of parent to them is against the natural order in a way. We have to learn how to modify our behavior. And I think the best way is to go to them as their child typically and ask their help, because that part of them is still intact in many cases. The need to parent or to parent and take care of their child's needs. And so the link for today, y'all, is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r, and you see it on the screen. Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Lowercase r / all uppercase letters with numbers, B as in boy 9, V as in victory, L W 68. And our password today is behavior, spelled capital B EHAVIOR. And are there any other questions for Mr. Curtis, or do you have anything to add?
Appreciate everyone being here and giving us this opportunity to share this information. Remember, the Alzheimer's Association is here for you. If there's any way we can help with you or your organizations, just feel free to reach out.
And Mr. Curtis will be back with us in the latter part of this year, around October, November, December. I need to look at the calendar. Next, March 17th, our next event is being modified. Our presenter cannot present. So we'll either have someone from the sheriff's department talking about behaviors again, or we'll have me talking about whatever it is that y'all want me to talk about. But I appreciate you for being here today. Please tell your friends about these free CEUs. and send our emails out to them so that they can join us. Thank you so much, Billy Curtis, again for being with us, and look forward to having you back as always. It was a lot of information. It was very helpful, and we're getting a lot of comments. Great presentation, such a helpful presentation. So I know it was rewarding for each of us. And this will be uploaded to YouTube, Ms. Calder, within the week. Any other questions, y'all? If not, I'll let you go. I hope you have a great week, great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you on March 17th. Y'all take care.